right, our next guest, I'm sure you're familiar with her name. She has deep roots here in Canada as a leading environmentalist and an environmental spokesperson. Tzeporah Burman just left. She's a former co-director for the climate unit at Greenpeace International, and she's come back to Canada for good reason and with a little fire in your belly. Tzeporah, how are you?
I'm doing well.
So first and foremost, tell us why you stepped down.
I decided, honestly, it was Minister Oliver's letter in the Globe and Mail.
Yeah.
And where, you remember it as the one where he called anyone who was opposed to more oil tankers on our coast and the Enbridge pipeline radical extremists, funded by foreign influence, and said, if you're Canadian, you have to be for this pipeline. And I thought, since when do we not allow debate in Canada?
Yeah.
So all Canadians who are concerned about oil spills are somehow now radical
Did that letter stick out right away? I mean, was it something you're like, oh, or did it take a little time to ferment?
No, it was, so at the time I was working on campaigns in the US and Europe, a little bit of work on India, and so not at all working in Canada, and all I could think about was that letter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just thought, well, what does this say? So our government is calling any citizen, and it was like this McCarthy chill, I actually had a friend call me up saying, I signed a petition against that pipeline. Should I be worried? Will I be on some list somewhere?
Well, it is really interesting. McCarthyism, there are a lot of parallels as to what's happening in Canada right now. David Suzuki also stepped down from the David Suzuki Foundation. What is happening?
Well, I think the Oliver letter was the first sign, and they were, I think, trying to create a controversy about environmental groups in order to really create a skirmish so people wouldn't notice the dramatic changes that they're actually doing to the laws.
And what are those dramatic changes?
So in this budget, which in the Omnibus Bill was just passed, I think, yesterday, there are 170 pages of changes to Canada's environmental laws. It takes us back about 20 years. Yeah. So in the Fisheries Act, we protect fish, but we don't protect where they live anymore. We don't protect fish habitat. The Endangered Species Act has been weakened. The Canadian Environmental Assessment Act has been weakened. There's huge changes to the regulatory process for big industrial projects.
In 2012, you think we'd be strengthening things like this, considering what's happening with our oceans and the environment and what we do know? So what has provoked this?
Honestly, I think it is the pipeline through the Great Bear Rainforest. It's the Enbridge pipeline and the debates around that. And, the proposal for that pipeline is to go from the oil sands to Canada's west coast and right through the Great Bear Rainforest. And in the process, that pipeline would cross thousands of fish-bearing streams.
Tzeporah, is this the Great Bear Rainforest that all Canadians just supported to have protected for future generations, and now we're...
And that the federal government, Minister John Baird, came to BC and stood on a stage and said how proud he was to stand there with Forest Ethics and Tides Canada, the groups he's now condemning. And, this is, at one point, this was why they were calling us eco-heroes for Canada, to protect this Great Bear Rainforest. But now that it's in their way of increased oil development at all costs, it's a big problem.
We touched on the thing that I find most disturbing about this. I mean, obviously, protecting the environment is foremost for most people, and there is a deep understanding that, we are paying this world forward to our grandchildren. But the idea that this is becoming about free speech. And that's really the nux of this for me, is that you can't frame a debate where someone is expressing a well-thought-out and rational opinion as marginalizing them as something that they're not, as a terrorist, as a marginal voice, as all this stuff. It's really bad.
I know. I've been trying to have these conversations with my kids since we moved back to Canada, helping them understand the issues as they try and figure it out. And had this conversation with my 8-year-old at dinner, and he turned to me and said, "So, Mommy, why does the government think you're a terrorist?" Like, really? Is that the conversation we should be having? We need to have a conversation in Canada about what direction our economy is heading. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we can't protect the environment, that we can't protect our air and our drinking water and our fisheries habitat while doing business is absurd. Like, it's so yesterday.
So what can people do to get involved and try and turn this around so we're back where we should be?
Well, you know, it's why I wrote this book. I think everyone needs to get involved, and you don't have to be an expert. We are voters. You know, we can write to our MLAs and our MPs, and we can encourage them to encourage debate. Ask them to pass laws to protect our air and water. And honestly, I'm encouraging people to oppose these pipelines because there's a reason on our coast that Calamity Bay is called Calamity Bay or Grief Point or Terror Point.
These are some of the toughest waters in the world.
It is.
And putting super tankers in there is
crazy. And now it's not only the pipeline through the Great Bear Rainforest, it's also right here in Burrard Inlet. They're proposing more pipelines there. Do we really want to be just a resource colony for U.S. consumption, or do we want to create an economy that is healthy for our kids?
You say something really early in the book, and it's actually out in paperback today as well for people that are wondering, but about environmentalism and environmental protection not being a monetary problem. It's really a people problem. It's the decisions that we make. It's not that the decisions aren't good or they aren't intelligent. It's that we have to have the will to just make those. And people stand in the way of these decisions more than any other environmental factor.
You know, Denmark passed a law last week committing to be 100% renewable. Their entire country 100% renewable by 2050. We are seeing these changes around the world. We have the technology today to do amazing things.
And what's the downside of trying to do amazing things? You end up with amazing things. You know, I mean, that's the craziest part about this to me is we talk about environmentalism and people, you know, once again, there's that marginalization that happens, but what's the repercussion of trying this stuff and attempting it? You make the world better.
Right, you do in the long term. I mean, I don't want to say that the changes aren't going to be difficult. Reducing our dependence on the oil sands, increasing renewable energy, those are big changes for our society, but they're totally possible. And it's about planning for those and about taking the steps to ensure that that happens. I mean, we are doing it in some places. Look at Vancouver, an incredibly green city. They're making a plan.
And
you know, we're going to do it.
Forward thinking in that kind of thing. And when we're dealing with a government who's passing laws that are doing the opposite of what we're all trying to do, it just seems so backwards.
Yeah.
It was so funny because a truck, I hope everybody saw a truck just went by that said thinking green means being green. Right when you were saying that.
Thank you for arranging that, Tzeporah.
It's the irony of the world that we're living in, that's what we're, and it was the City of Vancouver truck. It's just, it's crazy. But people can pick up the book today if you want more information. It's out in paperback as well, so you can check it out on Tzeporah's website.
Tzeporah, thank you. We look forward to hearing your voice and seeing where you end up in the Canadian political scene. It's most welcome. Thank you. We're going to take a break.